March 23, 1993. Even though it was Tate's 25th birthday and he had gone out to pick up groceries, Noah chose to stay home. Tate had insisted there was no need for a party or any elaborate celebration. He wanted a quiet day, just the two of them, and Noah intended to respect that. Besides, it gave Noah time to prepare the house, think about the small cake he planned to make later, and look forward to spending the rest of Tate's birthday together once he returned. After Noah finished lunch and hung up after his call with Susie, the house settled into a familiar, comfortable silence. He rinsed his mug in the sink, absent-mindedly dried his hands on a dish towel, and wandered toward the front of the house. A dull mechanical sound drifted in through the walls. His head lifted immediately. That sounded like tires on the driveway. Noah crossed the foyer, his socked feet nearly silent against the hardwood floor. Sunlight poured through the towering bay windows that overlooked the circular drive. Resting a hand against the window frame, he leaned forward just enough to peer outside. For a split second, his heart jumped. Tate. He had been gone for several hours, between picking up groceries and stopping at the auto center to have the car looked at after an oil change. Noah found himself smiling before he even confirmed who it was. It had become second nature to look for Tate whenever he heard a vehicle approach. Noah narrowed his eyes against the afternoon glare, trying to make out the driver through the windshield. "Please let that be him," he murmured quietly to himself. If it were Tate, Noah already knew exactly what would happen. Tate would come through the front door pretending to be annoyed that the errands had taken so long, set the grocery bags down dramatically, complain about how incompetent someone at the auto center had been, then insist Noah inspect whatever they had repaired as though Noah were secretly an automotive engineer. The thought made Noah laugh softly under his breath. Even Tate's complaints had become oddly comforting. He stayed at the window, watching the vehicle make its way up the driveway, waiting to see whether the driver stepping out would indeed be the one person he had been hopping to see. Through the bay windows for a moment I thought I saw Tate standing there. He looked incredibly attractive and my heart immediately sped up. I hurried to unlock the front door, wanting to help him carry in the groceries. As he came closer, I found myself noticing all the little things about him, the easy confidence in the way he walked, the sunlight catching in his black hair, the relaxed expression on his face. He looked so effortlessly handsome that my pulse quickened all over again. We were only buddies, and I reminded myself of that constantly. Even so, I couldn't stop the reaction. Whenever Tate was nearby, my heart always seemed to beat a little faster, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I stepped out onto the front porch. Tate's back was to me, and for a brief moment I smiled, convinced Tate had finally made it home. "Tate," I called. As Tate turned around, I stopped in my tracks. I blinked once. Then again. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Tate at all. But my God, the man looked exactly like him. For a heartbeat, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The same hazel eyes, the same angular jaw, the same tousled black hair, even the same posture. The only noticeable difference was that this man appeared to be a few years older than Tate, with slightly more mature features and the faint confidence of someone who had lived just a little longer. It was like looking at Tate several years into the future. I stared, momentarily speechless, trying to understand how a complete stranger could look so uncannily familiar. That was when I finally noticed the vehicle parked in the driveway. It wasn't Tate's Volvo. It was a red pickup truck with an Arizona license plate. Tate definitely didn't drive a pickup. My eyes drifted back to the stranger, my confusion only deepening. Who was this person? Why was he here? And more importantly, why did he look like a carbon copy of Tate? It was uncanny. If someone had told me they were brothers or twins, I would have believed them without hesitation. Every feature seemed almost identical, as though someone had taken Tate and simply aged him a few years. I stood there on the porch trying to make sense of what I was seeing, unable to tear my eyes away from the stranger. The man was holding his coat. He walked up the front path with familiarity, as if he belonged here, and walked with a swagger of confidence and sex appeal. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. Something about his appearance tugged at my memory, an old recognition I couldn't quite grasp. I knew that face, I was sure of it, but too much time had passed for me to place where or when. I stood there a moment longer than I should have before he knocked. When I opened the door, the screen creaked softly between us. "Hi," I said, "can I help you?" The attractive man smiled slowly, his eyes lingering on me just long enough to make my stomach tighten. He looked like an older, more mature version of Tate. The resemblance was almost unsettling. His broad, chiseled frame filled out his stylish clothes effortlessly, and he carried himself with the same quiet confidence Tate always seemed to possess, only tempered by a few more years of life and experience. Every movement, every expression, every subtle mannerism echoed Totem Blue so perfectly that it was difficult to believe they weren't closely related. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though I were looking at Tate several years in the future, the familiar features sharpened by age into something even more striking. "You've grown," the man said, smiling broadly with the same smile Tate seldomly shone at me. I blinked. "Excuse me. Don't you remember me, Noah?" the man asked with an easy smile. "I know it's been more than 2 years, but I didn't think you'd forget me." I stared at him, still trying to place his face. He chuckled softly at my confusion. "I'm Joseph, but everyone calls me Joey," he said, as though that explained everything. "I'm Tate's favorite uncle. Terrence is my brother." The moment the words left his mouth, everything clicked into place. Of course, that was why the resemblance was so uncanny. Joey wasn't just someone who looked like Tate by coincidence, he was family. I'd sat on this man's lap a dozen times as a kid, and Joey wrote me letters while he traveled during my stay at Brown. "Oh," I said, suddenly feeling foolish for not recognizing a face I'd seen at Tate's house on birthdays and at Christmas scattered through the years. It had been a long time since I'd last seen him. A few years, at least. Ever since Tate and Joey's falling out due to the Denver snowfall, which delayed him on Tate's 16th birthday, Tate didn't want him to come around anymore. Tate never mentioned Joey anymore, which struck me as odd after his uncle missed years of holidays and birthdays, but Tate had never liked going into depth about his feelings for people. He preferred the present, kept the past sealed off. "Would you like to come in for a few minutes?" I said. "It's Tate's birthday, but he's out right now. Would you like a refreshment, a drink maybe?" I gestured toward the refrigerator across the room. He smiled again. "Do you have apple cider, perhaps?" "Yes, warm or cold?" I asked. "Cold. I always prefer things cold and sweet," Joey said. "Do you mind if I take a seat here by the couch?" "Be my guest," I replied. "Tate should be back in about half an hour. He didn't go far. The lines at the convenience store are usually short." "It's a lovely day," Joey said easily. The drive was relaxing. "Where do you live now?" I asked. "Phoenix, Arizona," he said. "I moved there in 1980 after I graduated from university in Paris when Tate was 12 to be near my nephew." "I remember how much Tate loved you until..." Joey nodded. "Tate doesn't understand disappointments or emotional letdowns." I'd always gotten along well with Tim and Joey, Tate's uncles. Despite being incredibly wealthy, influential, and well-known businessmen, neither of them had ever carried themselves as though they were above anyone else. They were warm, approachable, and surprisingly easy to talk to, which made it easy to forget just how powerful they were in the business world. Once I recognized Joey, my initial confusion melted away, replaced by a genuine smile. I remembered how Tate used to accuse Joey of transferring his familial bond that his uncle used to shower on Tate, then later gave it to me, teasing that he'd replaced Tate with me as his favorite nephew. I never believed that for a second. Beneath the joking, I always knew Joey loved Tate deeply. What Joey had done was make me feel welcome in a family that rarely embraced outsiders, especially someone who had grown up in a trailer park. From the very beginning, he treated me as though I belonged. He never made me feel like I was being tolerated out of politeness. Instead, he made me feel wanted, included, and genuinely enjoyed my company. That was simply who Joey was. He possessed an effortless emotional openness that immediately put people at ease. Conversations with him flowed naturally, no matter the subject. He listened without judgment, spoke with sincerity, and somehow had a way of making you feel understood without even trying. In that respect, he was very different from Tate. Tate felt everything with overwhelming intensity, yet he guarded those feelings behind towering emotional walls. He avoided certain conversations, buried painful thoughts, and often struggled to say what he truly meant, even to the people he loved most. Joey, by contrast, never seemed afraid of vulnerability. He could talk about almost anything, and his calm, reassuring presence made it easy for other people to do the same. Over the 14 years I'd lived in the Blue Mansion before leaving for college, I'd gone to Joey more times than I could count. Sometimes I called him, other times I wrote him letters whenever I couldn't make sense of something Tate had said or done. Whenever Tate lashed out at school, acted like I didn't matter around the popular kids, or behaved in ways that completely contradicted how he treated me at home, Joey was the one I turned to. He never dismissed my questions. Instead, he patiently explained them. Joey had told me that Tate's neurological and stunted emotional development had left him struggling to process and express his feelings in healthy, consistent ways. He explained that Tate often experienced emotions far more intensely than other people, but lacked the emotional maturity to communicate them directly. Instead, they came out sideways as anger, avoidance, sarcasm, jealousy, or impulsive behavior. Knowing that didn't excuse the hurtful things Tate sometimes did, but it helped me understand that there was usually more happening beneath the surface than what I could see. Without Joey's guidance, I honestly don't think I would have stayed as long as I did. There had been so many moments when I'd been ready to walk away, convinced Tate didn't value me the way I valued him. Every time I reached that point, Joey helped me understand another piece of the puzzle. He never told me to ignore my own feelings, but he gave me enough insight into Tate that I could see the difference between what Tate felt and what he was actually capable of expressing. Joey became the bridge between us. Whenever there was something about Tate I couldn't understand, Joey explained it. Whenever there was a question Tate couldn't or wouldn't answer, Joey filled in the missing pieces. He never betrayed Tate's confidence, but he helped me understand the motivations behind behaviors that otherwise would have made no sense. After helping raise Tate for much of his childhood, Joey understood him better than almost anyone. He had been the one who enforced boundaries, disciplined him when necessary, comforted him when he fell apart, and patiently taught him the emotional skills that didn't come naturally. If there was anyone in the world who truly understood Tate Blue inside and out, it was Joey. I realized I didn't even know much about Joey's life outside of the pieces I had seen over the years. I never knew if he had ever married, if he had children, or if there was a family waiting for him somewhere beyond the world I knew him in. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. And standing there now, I realized how strange it was that I couldn't even clearly remember what he had looked like during his last visit. Time had blurred the details. I remembered his voice, his patience, the way he made people feel comfortable, but the image of him had faded. Yet somehow, seeing him again brought everything rushing back. He looked different now, older perhaps, but not in a way that diminished him. If anything, there was a maturity and confidence about him that hadn't been there before. The resemblance to Tate was still impossible to ignore, but Joey carried himself differently. Where Tate was intense and guarded, Joey seemed settled, comfortable in his own skin. I stood there looking at him, realizing that nearly 3 years had passed since the last time we'd spoken, and yet he still felt strangely familiar. Had never told anyone this, but when I was a very little boy, before I was even 8 years old, I had the smallest, most innocent crush on Uncle Joey. It wasn't anything I fully understood at the time. I just knew that I liked being around him. I liked the way he talked to me, the way he listened, the way he never made me feel like I was just some kid who happened to be there. Joey treated me with a kind of kindness and patience that I wasn't used to receiving from many people. Looking back, I realized it wasn't really about Joey himself, it was about what he represented. He was safe. He was warm. He made me feel seen. And in a strange way, Joey was the person who helped me understand my feelings for Tate. Because the things I admired in Joey, the way he cared, the way he made me feel important, the way his presence made a room feel calmer, were the same things I began to recognize in Tate, even when Tate himself couldn't always show them. Joey helped me see the person underneath Tate's defenses. He was the first person who made me realize that what I felt for Tate wasn't just friendship or loyalty. It was something deeper. Something that had been growing quietly for years while I was too young to name it. The irony was that Tate used to joke about Joey stealing his place in my life, but the truth was almost the opposite. Joey was one of the reasons I understood just how much Tate meant to me. When I looked at the contrast between Tate and Joey, it was striking, but what fascinated me was how similar they were beneath the surface. Joey was warm, his kindness was effortless, and people naturally gravitated toward him. Tate could be warm too, but there was always a duality to him. One moment he could make you feel like the most important person in the world, and the next he could become distant, guarded, almost impossible to reach. Joey was open. He welcomed people in, embraced change, and seemed comfortable letting others see who he truly was. Tate was different. He carried more walls, more defenses. He protected the parts of himself that mattered most, as though letting people too close was something dangerous. Joey had a way of making you feel like you were the center of the universe. He gave people his full attention, made them feel valued, and had a gift for making everyone around him feel included. Tate had a completely different kind of gravity. He didn't have to try to hold someone's attention. People noticed him without him asking for it. There was something unforgettable about him, something intense and magnetic that made it impossible not to look his way. Joey was charismatic, confident, and adventurous. He had the kind of energy that made life feel like something to chase. He embraced experiences, took risks, and seemed determined to live every moment fully. Tate was charismatic too, but in a completely different way. He was reserved and guarded, yet somehow still flamboyant and impossible to ignore. He was popular, talked about, remembered. People didn't simply meet Tate Blue, they remembered him. Joey seemed fearless about life. Tate, despite appearing like someone who had the world at his feet, often seemed terrified of it. And maybe that was the biggest difference between them. Joey had learned how to open himself to the world. Tate had learned how to survive it. "Do you ever marry or have kids?" "No," Joey said, not sounding regretful. "Never found the right available girl. I fucked a brunette girl for almost 10 years and thought I had, but she betrayed me and fell for a cute blonde businessman instead." Joey had never struggled to attract women. He was the kind of man who turned heads without trying. Handsome in an effortless way, charismatic without forcing it, and confident enough to make anyone in the room feel seen. Women gravitated toward him. They laughed at his jokes, lingered a little longer in conversations, and found excuses to be near him. If he'd wanted to, he could have dated someone new every week. None of it had ever mattered. From the time he was a teenager, his heart had belonged to one person. His childhood sweetheart. For 10 years, Joey built his life around the quiet certainty that one day they would be married. Every promotion he earned, every apartment he rented, every long-term decision he made included her in the picture. He never questioned it. She was his future. Then, without warning, everything unraveled. She fell in love with someone else. It wasn't a dramatic argument that ended them. It wasn't years of resentment or a slow collapse. She simply chose another man. 10 years. A decade of loyalty. A decade of believing he was waiting for the woman he would spend the rest of his life with. Gone. People assumed Joey recovered quickly. How couldn't he? He was handsome, successful, funny. Women practically lined up to date him. They didn't understand. It was never about finding someone. It was about losing the person. No amount of attention could replace the future he'd spent 10 years believing was real. Compliments became background noise. Flirting felt hollow. Every new relationship carried the silent question he could never quite shake. What if this happens again? That was why Joey never seemed enthusiastic whenever the subject of marriage came up. It wasn't that he didn't believe in love. He believed in it enough to wait 10 years. He simply wasn't sure he believed promises lasted forever anymore. "She was my fiancée," Joey said quietly. "I proposed years ago." The room fell silent. "She promised she'd move to Arizona. We were supposed to start our life together." He let out a hollow laugh that held no humor. "I even bought a house," she picked at herself. He stared down into the amber cider in his glass, turning it slowly between his fingers. Then, at the last minute, his voice faltered, "She decided she wanted to stay with another man." No one spoke. "I found out she'd been cheating on me for years." The confession settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Joey managed a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But," he said softly, swallowing the lump in his throat, "she's happy." He paused, his gaze never leaving the cider. "That's all that matters." The sadness in his expression lingered long after the words were gone. Noah watched him in stunned silence. Who would have imagined that Joey, a wealthy businessman, effortlessly handsome, the kind of man everyone assumed could have anyone he wanted, understood heartbreak as intimately as he did? For the first time, Noah realized that charm, money, and good looks had never made Joey immune to pain. They had only made everyone assume he didn't have any. "I'm so sorry," I blushed. "I haven't seen Tate in a few years," Joey said. "It's hard to make the trip from Arizona to California on a whim. I should have come sooner, but I recently had a health scare and decided I needed to see my nephew." Joey smiled, then took a sip of his cider and nodded appreciatively. "Very good," he said. "Did you make it?" "No, it's store-bought," I replied with a small smile, "but thank you for thinking so." I sat down facing him. He settled onto the couch while I took the recliner across from him. "A health scare?" I asked. "Nothing too serious, I hope." "Nothing immediate or avoidable," he said, "but it's something I need to talk to my nephew about." He paused, then added, "I want to talk to him first." "Oh, okay," I said. I hesitated, then asked, "Were you and Tate close when he was a child?" A distant look settled over Joey's face. For a moment, he wasn't in the room anymore. His thoughts drifted to Tate, his only nephew. A small, wistful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as one memory after another resurfaced. The afternoons they had spent together, the road trips, the laughter that came so easily, the conversations that had lasted long into the night, and the quiet moments that had needed no words at all. Those memories were priceless. They weren't extravagant or remarkable to anyone else, but to Joey they were treasures. There was something uniquely precious about them because there would never be another nephew. Tate wasn't simply one of many children in the family, he was the only one. Every birthday, every joke, every lesson, every shared meal, every victory and disappointment they had weathered together had become woven into Joey's heart over the years. The memories had grown more valuable with time. Some things couldn't be bought, replaced, or recreated. Time with Tate was one of them. "You could say that," Joey replied. "We were not as close as I would have liked. Distance made it difficult living in Phoenix, and my travels meant I only got to New York or California a few times a year. I regret not seeing him more." "I have regrets too," I admitted. "My mom was very standoffish and she worked constantly. We never got to spend much time together." "How is your mom doing?" Joey asked gently. "She died a few years ago," I said. "A car accident in 1990 after I graduated from Brown. She died instantly." "I'm sorry," Joey said quietly. "I forgot she had passed away. It had been many years since I bumped into her. Did Tate help you through that? I mean, did he support you?" "Yes," I said. "He was very good to me." "I'm glad," Joey said. "Tate has always been very," he searched for the word, "disengaged, I suppose. Whenever I tried to bond with him, it was hard to bring him out of his shell. I tried, but it wasn't easy." "He's like that with most people," I said. "Susie, she's a college friend of ours. We met her at Brown. She's been trying for years to get Tate to open up." Joey smiled faintly. "She hasn't succeeded yet," I added. "It's been almost a decade. He's still," I sighed, "like a lump of coal." "Is Tate reserved with you?" Uncle Joey asked. "No," I said without hesitation. "He's never been that way with me. Ever since we met after his move from New York to California when he was 4, he told me everything about his past and what he wanted to do in the future." Joey's face shifted drastically, something unreadable crossing his expression. "Everything? What do you mean by that?" "Yes," I said. "I don't think there's anything Tate experienced that he hasn't told me." Joey's expression darkened in an instant. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by unmistakable disbelief. His jaw tightened. "I never would have guessed," Joey said quietly. "He never told anyone anything when it came to his private life. It was like pulling teeth just to get him to say what he did in preschool. Even when he was older, 10, 13, he wouldn't give up information. He'd just sit there silent. Most of us eventually stopped asking. We thought he was either painfully shy or socially awkward." "Well," I said, almost smiling, "he's really changed." "Has he?" Joey asked. "That's surprising. Tate was great at sports when he was younger, under 10 especially, but you held him back. He'd rather be with you than play ball." "He was a popular jock in high school," I said. Joey blinked. "Really?" "Really," I said. "I'm glad he mellowed out a bit." "Has Tate always told you everything about his past?" Joey asked again, as if testing the words. "Did he tell you about our travels to famous landmarks and ice cream shops?" Joey smiled nostalgically for old times' sake. "Every little detail," I said. Even the chips he ate at school, why he chose them, why he liked them, he'd talk about why he thought a girl was pretty, what he noticed first. He paused, then asked carefully, "Tate likes girls." Joey's face showed shock, but he quickly smiled, laughing slightly. "Yes," I said simply. "Why?" "No reason, I thought Tate was relationship avoidant." Joey hesitated, then added something almost as an afterthought. "There was one other thing," he said. "Tate was touch avoidant, very much so." I looked up at him. Touch avoidant. He hated it, Joey said plainly. Hugs, hands on his shoulders, relatives ruffling his hair, he couldn't stand it. Tate's aunts and uncles tried for years. He'd stiffen, pull away, or flat out disappear. He'd hide under tables, lock himself in bedrooms, crawl into bed and pretend to sleep just so people wouldn't touch him. Joey gave a small, wry smile. He even bit me a few times, especially as a teenager. I leaned in to hug him goodbye when he was 16, and he bit my arm hard enough to leave a mark. I couldn't help it, I laughed softly, shaking my head. "That's not the Tate I know." Joey raised his eyebrows. "No. He never stops touching me," I said, almost embarrassed by how easily the words came. "Not in a bad way, just constant, a hand on my arm, my knee, my back. He leans into me, sleeps pressed up against me. If we're sitting, he finds a way to be in contact." I paused. I thought that was just how he was. Joey looked a little uneasy. "Did he tell you why we always went to historical sites?" he asked. Noah nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "He said it was because you loved learning about history," Noah chuckled, "but he also said it was because you liked spoiling him." Joey raised an eyebrow. "You'd buy him junk food, candy, and the most ridiculous souvenirs you could find. He said you'd come home with bags full of things neither of you needed." Noah laughed. Joey couldn't help but smile. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head fondly, "Tate was always a kidder." His smile softened as memories washed over him. Though, he admitted with a quiet laugh, he wasn't entirely wrong. For a moment, the sadness that had lingered in Joey's eyes gave way to something warmer, the unmistakable affection of an uncle remembering the little boy who had made every trip more memorable simply by being there. After I told Joey about our sleeping arrangement in this house, Tate's uncle looked genuinely stunned. "You still sleep with Tate? That's incredible," he said quietly. He hated people encroaching on his personal space. I could tell by the look on Joey's face that he didn't approve of Tate sleeping with me, especially with us heading toward the age of 25, but he schooled his features and hid his disappointment and uncomfortable demeanor. "This probably isn't any of my business," Joey said. Tate's uncle hesitated, staring at his shoes. "But I've always wondered, and Tate is too reserved to honestly tell me, did you ever have a sexual relationship with Tate? Were you and my only nephew lovers?" My breath hitched because that was not the question I expected Joey to ask. Joey had been one of the staunch adversaries against Tate's relationship with me. He wanted Tate to keep his distance from me because of the gay rumors concerning that blonde boy. I shook my head and Joey didn't flinch as the words left him. He said them cleanly, almost clinically, like he was reading from a report he believed was already settled. "I'm looking after my nephew's welfare," he continued, eyes steady on me. "I'm sure you're a fine boy with your own attributes and talents. Brown University, yes, I've heard you'll go far." There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "But my nephew is going to be a CEO, a leader in commerce. He's going to be a wealthy man. He doesn't need any scandals surrounding him." His gaze sharpened as if he were finally getting to the part he actually cared about. "Especially not with the rumors that swirl around you, gay rumors." The last words weren't spoken like an accusation exactly, more like contamination. My hand tightened around the edge of the seat I resided on. For a moment I didn't respond, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was trying to decide which version of myself I was allowed to be in this moment. The polite one, the furious one, the one Tate would hate for making things worse. From somewhere behind me the cake cooled. The mixing bowl sat untouched on the counter. The birthday I'd tried to build was still waiting as it mattered. Joey didn't move. He didn't need to, men like him rarely did. "I don't know what you think you're protecting him from," I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. "But I'm not a scandal, and I'm not something you get to manage out of his life." A flicker of something crossed Joey's face, annoyance maybe, or the surprise that I hadn't folded. I shrugged, suddenly aware of how much weight that realization carried, that landed deeper than I expected. Joey let out a long sigh like he was preparing himself for something he believed was inevitable. I didn't want it to come to this, he said, rubbing his thumb against the edge of his palm as if grounding himself. But I can't keep pretending you don't deserve to know what's been happening. Joey let out a long sigh like he was preparing himself for something he believed was inevitable. Talia told me, he continued carefully, that my nephew has very serious psychological and neurological difficulties. I never wanted that information reaching you like this, but you're an adult now, and I can't keep it hidden. He gestured faintly, as if stacking invisible files in the air. Tate has more complexity, more instability than I could ever put into words, and he does not need disruption in his life. He needs structure, control, predictability. His gaze sharpened on me again. Ever since you came into his life, that's exactly what he hasn't had. His young years consisted of emotional volatility, conflict, episodes, breakdowns, whatever you want to call them, it always circles back to you. I felt my fingers tighten slightly at my side, but I didn't speak. Joey pressed on. I'm not saying you're a bad person, he added quickly, though it didn't sound like belief. You seem decent, intelligent, you've done well academically. Brown University isn't nothing. You could have a stable future, a life that isn't tied to chaos. For 15 years I've loved you as a second nephew, someone who makes Tate ecstatically happy and settled, but it hurts my heart that I have to explain all this to you, because if Tate weren't a wealthy boy I wouldn't interfere. I'd be happy for you both. He paused, then lowered his voice like he was offering something reasonable. But what you're attached to, what you think you feel, you have to understand it won't survive this. He exhaled again. My nephew is going to be a wealthy man, a leader in commerce, that's his path, and he doesn't need complications, he doesn't need a gay scandal, he doesn't need people questioning his stability or his judgment. The implication hung there, heavy and unspoken in its judgment. And let's be honest, Joey added, his tone turning sharper again, he can give you things: security, comfort, a lifestyle, a house, a boat, a car, maybe even fleeting distractions, but he cannot give you what you actually want from him. He studied me for a second, and you know it. That was when he leaned in just slightly, like he was confiding something meant to be merciful. I know you're passionately in love with Tate and have been since you were 8, Joey said more quietly, but he will not return those feelings in the way you need. He neurologically can't, not in any way that's possible, not in a way that exists. His voice softened, almost pleading now. Romantic feelings terrify my nephew and initiate his seizures, rages, and dissociations. So let him go before this turns into something worse, before he breaks you down without meaning to. Or before you start resenting him for everything he cannot be. I stood there for a moment like the floor had shifted without telling me, like the words had landed somewhere just out of reach, and I was still waiting for my mind to catch up. Joey knew, not just suspected, not just guessed from the way I looked at Tate or the way Tate looked at me when he thought no one was watching. He knew I loved Tate, and he had been carrying it quietly until now. I felt my throat tighten, my hands going cold in a way that had nothing to do with the apartment. I was shocked. Did you tell Tate about my feelings? I said. When we were kids or recently, does your nephew know about everything? Joey was looking at me like he was trying to steady something fragile, as I might break in a way that couldn't be fixed if he said it wrong. I didn't say anything before, he admitted, voice lower now, because I thought your crush would pass or Tate's fixation would end, but nothing's changed in 2 decades. I thought you'd see it for yourself and step away without me having to interfere. He swallowed, visibly uncomfortable now that the words were out in the open. I know you care about him, he said carefully, and in some twisted way Tate cares about you too, I'm not denying that. A pause, but it isn't stable, it isn't healthy for him, it pulls him off balance. His eyes flicked briefly toward me again, then back to the front window. Tate fixates? Joey continued, choosing his words like each one was something he'd rehearsed and regretted at the same time. On people, on connections, it happened before someone he was close to, Wayne, and it ended badly, and now it's happening again. My chest tightened at the name, at the implication of history I hadn't been given. It's a pattern, Joey said quietly. Attachment that becomes overwhelming, intense idealization, and then when reality doesn't match what he needs it to be, it turns, it always turns. Tate had a fixation on everyone in his family, expected them to fulfill his expectations, and when they didn't or couldn't, he reacted in hatred by putting distance between him and the individual. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. I'm telling you this because I don't think you understand what that means long term. It isn't romance, it becomes a dependence, and pressure, and resentment when expectations aren't met. His voice sharpened just slightly, urgency creeping in. Tate will burn through people who get too close, not because he's evil, because he can't regulate it, and you will end up paying for it. I felt something rise in me then, confusion, anger, grief all tangled together. Joey stepped forward a fraction, as if trying to close the distance before I could retreat into denial. I need you to hear me, he said more firmly now. This doesn't end in a shared life, it doesn't end in stability, it ends in one of you breaking first. His jaw tightened, and I don't want that to be you. A beat of silence followed, heavy enough to press against the walls. Joey didn't turn immediately, but when he did, his expression softened again, less defensive now, more exhausted. I'm not trying to hurt you, he said to Noah. I'm trying to stop you from destroying each other before you even realize you're doing it. And for the first time, his voice dropped into something almost pleading. Just step away while you still can, before this becomes something you can't undo. Joey's expression changed as he spoke again, something in him hardening, like he had reached the part of the story he never liked to say out loud. When Tate was younger, he said carefully, he developed a fixation on Wayne. He paused, choosing his words with visible reluctance. And when Wayne didn't feel the same way or didn't respond the way Tate needed him to, Tate didn't handle it well. Wayne's father told me that his son turned down Tate's advances, but Tate forced himself on Wayne at night anyway, traumatizing the boy. Joey's earlier words were still spinning in my head when he changed his tone again, softer now, almost careful, like he believed gentleness would make the rest easier to swallow. I'm only looking out for your best interest, he said quietly. Then, without really asking, he reached up and brushed my hair back from my forehead in a gesture that felt strangely misplaced, like affection trying to pass for concern. I've always had a soft spot for you, Joey added. That's why I never wanted you getting close to Tate. The way he said Tate's name made it sound familiar rather than a warning. His mental illness makes Tate not a good person during his psychosis and breakdowns, Joey continued, immediately softening it again as if to cushion the impact. Not because he chooses to be, but because his mental illness makes him unhinged at times. My stomach tightened at that word. Joey didn't stop. Tate's father wouldn't get him the help he needed, he said, voice lowering further like he was revealing something private. And his mother, she was too weak to force the issue, so things developed the way they did. He placed his hand on my shoulder, now firm, steady, grounding in a way that felt more controlling than comforting. Leave him alone, Joey said. Before he hurts you in ways you can't undo, he could assault, kill, or hospitalize you during one of his rages, and I want you to be safe, but that's not possible if he's around you. There was a pause long enough that it felt like he expected agreement to fill it. Then he leaned in just slightly, urgency creeping back into his voice. Joey's expression grew solemn. A few years ago, on Tate's 19th birthday, he paused, choosing his words carefully. He had what I can only describe as a psychotic episode, the stress, the anger, something in him just snapped. The room became unnaturally quiet. I walked upstairs at Talia's house and found Tate beating his godfather, Linus, nearly to death. Noah's face drained of color. I pulled him off as fast as I could. If I'd gotten there even a minute later, Joey exhaled slowly, the memory still haunting him. I honestly believe Tate would have killed him or left him permanently crippled. Noah couldn't speak. Later, Linus told me it started over a comment about you. Joey looked down at his hands. He swore it was harmless, but whatever he said, Tate flew into a blind, jealous rage. Joey shook his head. Tate misunderstood and thought Linus was trying to steal you away from him, and my nephew lost his mind. He slammed Linus into the wall over and over and almost strangled his godfather to death. His voice became quieter. By the time I got there, Linus had multiple broken fingers, a shattered nose, and he'd lost several teeth. Silence settled over the room. I paid for every surgery, hospital bill, and reconstruction procedure. I begged Linus not to involve the police. Joey swallowed hard. I even took the blame. Noah frowned. I told his family that Linus and I had gotten into a fight. I lied because, Joey's voice faltered, because I couldn't bear the thought of Tate's family looking at him like he was a monster. He stared into the distance. I knew that wasn't who he was. A long pause followed. But the single word seemed heavier than everything that had come before. It wasn't the first time Tate had hurt someone. Joey's shoulders sagged. And it wasn't the last. The confession hung in the air, leaving behind a silence that felt impossible to break. Promise me you'll stay away from him so I don't get an announcement in the mail for your funeral because Tate lost control one too many times and nobody stepped in. Behind him, the room felt too still. Even the sound of Noah's breathing seemed to have changed, measured, contained, like he was holding something in place by force. Joey exhaled, shaking his head faintly. Tate needs things to be perfect in his mind, he added, almost reluctantly. And when you can't be that, when you can't fit exactly what he's decided you should be, he turns on that person in rage and harms them. His eyes met mine again, steady and insistent. And when he turns, Joey said quietly, he doesn't just let go, he pushes away what doesn't match the picture anymore. People become either everything or nothing, he swallowed. You don't want to be there when you become nothing to him. I looked at Joey for a long moment. The words he wanted from me sat in the space between us like something he was waiting to collect. Joey was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. There's one more thing you should know. He folded his hands together, his expression weighed down by memory. When Tate becomes fixated on someone for years, he struggles when he realizes that person has their own bodily autonomy, their own choices, their own life, Joey sighed. If they choose to love someone else even platonically instead of romantically, he experiences it as betrayal. Noah listened without interrupting. I saw it happen firsthand. Joey's gaze drifted toward the window. A few years ago, I attended a charity gala. One of the businessmen there recognized Tate before he recognized me. He walked over smiling and said, "You two should meet." A bitter smile crossed Joey's face. He had no idea Tate was my nephew. Joey let out a hollow laugh. Tate looked me right in the eye and acted like he had no idea who I was. Noah frowned. He pretended not to know my name, not to recognize my face, nothing. The memory still stung. Everyone around us thought it was harmless teasing, they laughed. Joey didn't. He thought it was funny. His voice hardened. He enjoyed humiliating me. Joey looked down at his clasped hands. It wasn't enough for him to distance himself from me, he wanted me to know I'd been replaced. A heavy silence settled between them. He took a kind of cruel satisfaction in rubbing my nose in it, making sure I understood that he no longer wanted me in his life. Joey finally met Noah's eyes. And the person he'd turned to. His voice was barely above a whisper. Was you? Noah felt his stomach tighten. Only then did he begin to understand that Tate hadn't merely withdrawn from Joey. In Tate's mind, he had been making a statement. A painful one. Joey let out a weary sigh and leaned back in his chair. When Tate was 13 and 14, he began, he developed a habit. Noah looked up. He'd make plans with me weeks in advance. We'd talk about where we were going to eat, what museum we were going to visit, or what we'd do for the day. A faint smile crossed Joey's face before quickly fading. Then, at the last minute, he'd shake his head in the basement and tell me something had come up. He'd say he'd already made plans with you. Joey shrugged. Sometimes I believed him. He paused. Sometimes I knew he was lying. Noah frowned. He'd throw me over for you, then act like I was making a mountain out of a molehill if I looked disappointed. Joey's voice remained calm, but there was unmistakable hurt beneath it. The funny thing is, he looked at Noah with a small smile, I never minded when you came along. You didn't. Joey shook his head. No, I loved having you with us. He chuckled softly. I loved our drives, the ice cream runs, the historical sites, you fit right in. His smile disappeared. But Tate went out of his way to make sure we were almost never alone. Joey looked down at his hands. He believed I hadn't come to California often enough when he was younger, in his mind. That was a betrayal. So he punished me. The words were quiet. He wanted me to feel replaceable. A long silence followed. Joey finally looked back at Noah. Tate is one of the prettiest young men I've ever met. He smiled ruefully. And one of the most immature and selfish rich boys I've ever known. A soft, self-deprecating laugh escaped him. I suppose he gets some of that from me. There was no bitterness in Joey's voice as he said it. Only the resigned affection of a man who loved his nephew enough to recognize both his virtues and his deepest flaws. Noah sat there in stunned silence. He had never imagined Tate could be capable of that kind of cruelty. Not with someone like Joey. Joey had always been the person Noah thought Tate loved most, the person who understood him, protected him, and stood by him when no one else could. The idea that Tate could be petty, vindictive, or intentionally hurtful toward his own uncle was difficult for Noah to comprehend. Joey looked down, his expression heavy. There's one more thing you should know. Noah looked at him. When Tate is done with someone, he's done. Joey's voice was quiet but certain. He won't tell you, he won't sit down and have a difficult conversation. He won't say, I'm unhappy, or I met someone else, or I don't want this anymore. He paused. He'll just leave. The words hung in the air. He'll disappear, he'll walk away in the middle of the night and leave you trying to figure out what happened. Joey swallowed. And if he does leave a note, it won't be an explanation. It'll be something that minimizes everything you shared, all the years, all the memories, all the closeness. His eyes met Noah's. He'll make it sound like it wasn't as important as you thought it was. Noah felt a knot form in his stomach. Then he'll act like a stranger. Joey looked away. And the worst part, he may turn around and introduce you to the person who replaced you. The room became painfully quiet. I can see the pattern, Noah. Joey's voice softened. Someday, Tate may meet someone and convince himself he's in love, and when that happens, I worry he'll rewrite the entire story in his head. He took a slow breath. He'll convince himself that what you two had was just a phase, something from childhood, something that mattered once but doesn't anymore. Noah stared at him, unable to respond. He'll move on, he'll create a new life, he'll have a celebration, a wedding, a future. Joey's voice cracked slightly. And he may hand you an invitation like nothing happened, like 20 years of closeness and intimacy were just a memory you weren't supposed to care about anymore. He looked directly at Noah. And if you're hurt, he'll make you feel like you're the one being unreasonable. Joey leaned forward. I don't want that for you. A long silence passed. Leave before he leaves you. Noah looked at him. Because if you wait until he breaks your heart, you might not recognize yourself afterward. Joey's expression softened with sadness. I've watched Tate hurt people he loves because he doesn't know how to handle feeling abandoned. He paused. But I don't want you to be another person he leaves behind. Noah sat frozen. He felt horrified, not because he couldn't believe Tate had flaws, but because he couldn't understand how someone could treat a person they had loved for decades as if they were suddenly nothing. Not Joey. Not the person who had been there for Tate through everything. The thought of Tate walking away from someone who had devoted years of love, patience, and loyalty to him felt impossible. Joey's expression softened as he saw the disbelief on Noah's face. Please, Noah, Joey said quietly. The desperation in his voice caught Noah off guard. I've seen this happen so many times. He looked down, his fingers tightening around his glass. To other people, to myself. A painful silence followed. I don't want you to become another person who spends years wondering what happened, trying to understand why someone you loved could suddenly turn cold. Joey looked directly at him. I want you to be the person who breaks the cycle. Noah swallowed. Leave before Tate decides you're no longer useful to him. Leave before he looks at you like you mean nothing. His voice became heavier. Because the hardest part isn't just losing him. Joey shook his head. It's that he will go out of his way to never give you the closure you're looking for. He won't sit down and explain, he won't help you understand. He'll just leave you with questions while he moves on. Noah looked away. Please don't make the mistake of believing you're different from everyone else. Joey's words were painful but deliberate. You are special, Noah. A pause. But not to Tate. Being special doesn't always protect you from someone who doesn't know how to hold on to people. Joey's eyes filled with sadness. Tate has hurt people he loved because, somewhere along the way, he learned that leaving first feels safer than being left. He sighed. But the person left behind is the one who has to live with the damage. The room was silent. I don't want that person to be you. I'll think about it, I said finally. My voice didn't shake, but it didn't feel entirely like mine either. But I won't promise anything. Joey exhaled slowly, like that answer both relieved and disappointed him at the same time. He nodded anyway, small, controlled, as if he'd expected resistance but still hoped for compliance. I understand, he said, though it sounded more like resignation than acceptance. He stepped back a fraction, letting his hand fall from my shoulder. The weight of it lingered even after it was gone. I'm trying to save you from yourself, he added quietly, as if that explained everything he'd said before. Tate doesn't have the capability to love anyone platonically, sexually, or romantically, Noah. He's used every girl or boy who's been around him. Hell, he's used you for decades as a bedwarmer, emotional crutch, and breadcrumbed you from the very beginning, or offered nothing in return but materialistic things. You deserve a nice boy who loves you back, not my nephew who talked crap about you behind your back, never admits his feelings, or doesn't love you but allows you to believe he does. I was shocked at Joey's words, but Tate did do those things to me for years and more. Maybe in his mind it did, but something about it didn't land right in me, not fully. Because Joey wasn't in love with Tate, I was, and Joey couldn't understand how I felt. Joey wasn't tangled in the same gravity I was, the same way Tate's presence didn't feel like something I could simply step away from without tearing something out of myself in the process. Joey saw it from the outside, patterns, warnings, outcomes. He saw damage control, he saw risk. I saw Tate, not as a diagnosis, not as a cautionary story, not as something to manage from a distance, just Tate, and that was the part Joey didn't understand. That knowing all of this didn't make it simple, it didn't make it clean, it didn't make it something I could resolve by promising the right thing to the right person. It just made it heavier. Behind me, the room stayed still in that stretched silence, like even the memory of Tate was listening to what I didn't say out loud. And for the first time, I realized Joey wasn't really asking me to leave my home. He was asking me to stop loving someone he believed I couldn't survive loving. Joey was about to say something else. His mouth had already opened a word, his expression tightening as if he was choosing the next argument carefully, but then he stopped. Not because of anything I said, because of a sound. A car was pulling into the driveway out front, slow at first then steady. The familiar approach of tires over gravel meant Tate was coming home. Joey's head turned immediately toward the window. For a second, all the urgency in him shifted into something sharper, more alert. He crossed the room in 2 steps and reached for the curtain, pushing it aside just enough to look out the bay windows without fully exposing himself. Joey's posture changed the moment he saw the driveway. A warm, loving smile crossed Joey's lips, his body calmed and relaxed as he looked at his nephew. There it was, Tate's car, angled slightly as it rolled in, headlights cutting briefly across the front yard before switching off. Joey didn't move right away, he just watched. His hand stayed on the curtain like he was holding the situation in place by force of will alone. Behind him, the house felt different now. The conversation we'd been having didn't end, it just suspended itself, unfinished, waiting for the next impact. Joey's voice dropped lower, almost to himself. He didn't know I was coming today, he murmured, then more carefully. Like he was recalibrating everything he just said. Joey finally let the curtain fall slightly, though he didn't step away from the window. His eyes flicked back toward me, measuring, urgent again, but quieter now. Tate coming home changes things, Joey said. You need to understand that when he walks in, everything shifts. A pause, and whatever decision you think you're still making gets harder to hold on to. I glanced at my watch without meaning to. The movement felt automatic, like my body was trying to anchor itself to something ordinary while everything else in the room kept shifting. A half hour, that was all it had been since Joey arrived, though it felt longer, stretched out by everything Joey had said, everything I hadn't said back. Joey was still by the window, the curtain held slightly aside. He hadn't moved much since the car pulled in. His focus stayed outside, fixed on the driveway like he was tracking something both familiar and inevitable. And I noticed something I hadn't fully registered before. Joey wasn't tense. He was waiting, not in fear but in concern and love, maybe even in a kind of guarded relief. For all the things he'd said about Tate, about instability, patterns, damage, there was still something in Joey's face that softened at the sight of his nephew's car. Something instinctive, like love that didn't know how to stop even when it had learned to be afraid. Joey exhaled slowly, letting the curtain fall just a fraction more, though his eyes stayed trained outside. He's here, Joey said quietly. Not like an announcement, like a warning and a fact at the same time. I watched him for a moment longer. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no triumph in being right about anything. Just a complicated kind of care, strained, practiced, worn down by years of trying to intervene in something he couldn't fully control. And for a second I felt something unexpected shift in me, no agreement, not resistance, just understanding that Joey wasn't doing this from a distance or indifference. He wasn't detached from Tate the way I'd assumed someone like him might be. He was still attached, still emotionally invested, still trying to hold together something that kept pulling apart. Even after everything he just told me, even after all the warnings. Joey finally stepped away from the window slightly, rubbing his thumb against his palm again like he was bracing himself. "I didn't come here because I enjoy this," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I came because I've seen what happens when this goes too far." His eyes flicked back to me again, less sharp now, more tired. "I know you think you understand him," he added, "and maybe you do, in your own way." A pause. "But understanding someone isn't the same as being able to live through what they become when they lose control." Outside, the car door hadn't opened yet, just the quiet presence of it in the driveway, waiting. And Joey, still half-turned toward the window, looked like a man preparing for a conversation he'd had too many times before with someone he loved, even when it hurt him to do so. Even though Joey hadn't been around much when Tate was older, I could see it clearly now. The way his attention kept drifting back to the window wasn't just surveillance or concern. It was an attachment. There was a look on his face whenever Tate's name came up or whenever the car sat in the driveway that didn't match the sharp, analytical tone he used when he talked about risk or psychology. It was softer than that, older than that. Love, even if it had been reshaped by fear and frustration. I realized then that Joey wasn't just Tate's uncle in the casual sense people use the word for distant relatives who show up on holidays. It was something deeper than that, something closer to a father figure than anything else Tate had consistently had. If anything had ever gone wrong with Tate's parents, if circumstances had forced it, Joey would have been the one who stepped in. I could picture it almost too easily, him making decisions, taking responsibility, trying to build structure where everything had fallen apart. He would have taken Tate in without hesitation, even if it meant reshaping his own life around him. Because he did take it seriously. More seriously than Tate ever seemed to notice. That was what made it harder to reconcile the version of Joey standing in my living room right now, the man issuing warnings, laying out consequences, with the underlying care that kept bleeding through anyway. This wasn't indifference. It was a responsibility he never stopped carrying, even when it wasn't formally his anymore. And for a moment, I felt something uncomfortable settle in my chest as I watched him, because I could see it now. Joey wasn't speaking like someone trying to rid himself of Tate. He was speaking like someone who had tried for a long time to protect him and failed to make it matter in the way he needed it to. Joey's jaw tightened slightly as he kept his eyes on the driveway. "I missed one thing," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I missed his 16th party a few years ago." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. The way his voice softened on it said enough. Tate hadn't forgiven him for it. Or maybe he had, but only in the way Tate seemed to file things away, never fully letting them go, just storing them where they could still hurt later. Joey finally stepped away from the curtain, exhaling through his nose as if forcing himself back into the present. "He shut me out after that," he said, not bitterly, just factually. And there it was, the part I hadn't fully understood before. Tate wasn't someone Joey had stopped caring about, he was someone Tate had stopped allowing in. Which meant all of this, the warnings, the urgency, the control Joey was trying to exert now, wasn't just about me. It was about trying, in the only way he still could, to reach someone who no longer wanted to be reached. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized that whatever was about to happen when Tate walked through that door wasn't just going to be about love or warning or protection. It was going to be about everything none of us had managed to fix before it got to this point. "He's early," I said, surprised. "Let me unlock the door so he can bring in a few bags from the car." I stood and gestured toward the living room. "You can look around if you like, we have some photos over there." I pointed to the shelves lining the wall. "He actually likes having his picture taken." Joey let out a short, incredulous snort. "He hated having his picture taken," he said. "I tried every birthday, every Christmas." He'd hide behind his mother, sometimes literally duck behind her legs, and that didn't stop when he was little. He was still doing it at 15. I paused, my hand on the doorframe. "I remember," I said quietly. He was always peculiar on his birthday, Joey added, choosing his words carefully, more withdrawn than usual, like he wanted the day to pass without being noticed. That felt strange to hear, almost disorienting. The Tate I knew pretended to hate his birthday but secretly let me fuss over him anyway. I'll let you get the door, Joey said, already standing. Maybe I will take a look at the photos if that's okay. Help yourself, I said. There's more cider on the table if you want some. As I reached for the lock, I had the unsettling thought that I knew Tate intimately, and yet there were entire versions of him I'd never met. Tate walked in with 2 overstuffed bags of party supplies and a mess of streamers looped around his wrist. Thanks for getting the door, Tate said automatically, already moving toward the table where we ate most of our meals. He set the bags down with a soft thud. As he straightened, Tate reached out without thinking, sliding his fingers briefly through my hair in that familiar, absent-minded way, playful, affectionate, automatic way while kissing Noah's temple. Tate looked almost defensive as he set the 2 large bags down. I know you said you only needed frosting and 1 candle, he explained quickly, but I found a few things that might make the cake look nice. He started pulling items out one by one. Things that could make it look pretty without it becoming an actual celebration or a birthday thing. He glanced at me carefully. You don't have to use any of it if you don't want to, I just thought, he shrugged slightly. I know you're an artist and a cake is kind of a canvas. I couldn't help but laugh. Not because of the bags. Because of him. There was something almost impossible to understand about Tate. He could be so thoughtful. So attentive. He noticed tiny details other people would miss. He remembered preferences. He wanted to make something ordinary feel special without pushing past the boundaries he knew mattered. He could be gentle in ways that caught people completely off guard. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about Joey. How could someone who was capable of such kindness also be capable of hurting someone who loved him so deeply? How could the same person who stood in front of me, carefully choosing decorations for a cake, also be the person Joey described, the person who could become cold, distant, and devastating when he felt rejected? It was a contradiction I couldn't solve. Tate wasn't simply one thing. He wasn't just cruel or kind. He was both. And somehow that made him even harder to understand. Tate's hands gently wrapped around the top of my head as he pulled me closer. He leaned down, nuzzling against me with an almost childish affection, holding me there beside the kitchen counter as if the rest of the world could wait. There was something disarming about the way he showed love, playful, silly, and completely unguarded in moments like this. He hadn't noticed Joey yet. For once, I didn't want to think about anything else. I didn't want to analyze Tate, question him, or wonder how someone capable of such tenderness could also carry so much hurt and cause so much pain. I just wanted to stay there. I wanted to enjoy the rare moments when Tate let his walls disappear and showed affection without hesitation. The warmth of him, the ridiculous sweetness, the way he could make a simple moment in a kitchen feel like something worth remembering. Because this was Tate too. The person who could make you laugh. The person who could make you feel chosen. The person who, in moments like this, made it painfully easy to understand why people loved him so deeply. Tate and I were lost in the quiet intimacy of the moment when a voice suddenly cut through the kitchen and living room area. Joey's voice. The sound startled Tate immediately. His entire body tensed and his hands loosened as he quickly turned toward the voice. The warmth and playfulness that had filled the room only seconds before disappeared, replaced by surprise and uncertainty. For a moment, Tate simply stared at the wall instead of his uncle. He hadn't noticed Joey standing there. The interruption felt heavier than it should have, as if the air in the room had shifted. The comfortable little world Tate and I had been wrapped in was suddenly exposed to someone who carried years of history, memories, and unresolved pain. Joey stood quietly watching. And Tate, who had moments ago been relaxed and affectionate, now looked caught between confusion and something much deeper. The kitchen went silent. "Hey kid," a voice said from the living room. Tate froze, his entire body stiffened. His hand dropped from my hair. He turned slowly to his left, following the sound, and the color drained from his face. For a second he just stared like his brain was struggling to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. It made sense, he hadn't seen his uncle in years and neither of us had known he was coming. "Uncle Joey," Tate said, disbelief edging into something sharper. Joey smiled, tentative but warm. "Happy birthday, kid." Tate didn't move, his shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight, shock giving way to something closer to alarm. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he asked. It wasn't said like a greeting, it was said like a demand. "Where else would I be today?" Joey said lightly. "My favorite nephew was born on this day." Tate let out a short, humorless breath. "I haven't seen you in years," he said flatly. "Why now, why today?" Joey hesitated, then shrugged. "I drove in from Arizona where I've lived for years because I wanted to tell you something." Tate didn't answer, instead he dropped into a chair and pointed to the couch across from him. "When did you get into town? How long have you been sitting here waiting? Sit." Joey sat, his gaze flicked to me and he smiled. "Your roommate is very friendly," he said, then added, openly appraising and attractive. Tate's head snapped toward him. "Keep it in your pants, old man. Leave him alone, Uncle Joey. He's too much for you and he's mine, hands off." I saw it immediately. The expression on Tate's face changed. It wasn't just a surprise at seeing Joey standing there. It was something sharper, something I had seen before even if I hadn't understood it at the time. Jealousy. Possessiveness. A flash of fear disguised as anger. And suddenly, Joey's story from a few minutes earlier came rushing back to me. Tate's 19th birthday. Linus. The moment when Tate had convinced himself that someone was threatening what belonged to him. The pieces connected in a way that made my stomach tighten. Back then, Tate hadn't seen Linus as a person who had made a comment or someone who could simply be disagreed with. In Tate's mind, he had become a threat. Someone was standing between him and the person he was attached to. And now, seeing Joey interrupt this moment between us, I recognized that same instinct. That same dangerous shift. It wasn't about what was actually happening. It was about what Tate believed was happening. His emotions moved faster than reason. The fear of losing someone became anger. The possibility of being replaced became betrayal. I looked at Tate and saw the contradiction Joey had described. The same person who could hold me gently, bring me little gifts, and show affection in the most innocent ways could also become overwhelmed by the fear that someone else might take away the person he loved. And that frightened me. Because love wasn't supposed to feel like ownership. It wasn't supposed to turn someone into a threat simply because they mattered too. Standing there in the kitchen, watching Tate's expression harden, I finally understood what Joey had been trying to warn me about. Tate's greatest fear wasn't losing someone. It felt like he had already been replaced. There was no heat in his voice, no joke, just a statement of fact like gravity or weather. Joey blinked, then chuckled. "Ah, I see how it is. Fine, I was just being friendly anyway. You're a lucky man." Joey winked at me in a seductive playboy way. He laughed again, softer this time. "So how are you?" Tate stared at him. "How am I?" he echoed. "I'm looking at the uncle I haven't seen in years, who doesn't inquire about me, who avoids picking up the phone. You missed many birthdays, no calls, no showing up." Joey winced. "I mailed you presents." "Oh right," Tate said dryly. "You mailed them." "I was traveling," Joey said quickly. "Brazil, Austria, there was no way to make it back in time. I wrote you letters." "I know," Tate said, his voice oddly flat. "I got them, but it's not the same thing and you know it." Joey's shoulders slumped. "I know I've been a disappointment to you." "You could say that again," Tate replied. "More than a disappointment. When I was a young boy living with my emotionally and physically absent parents, you chose to chase after pussy instead of consistently connecting with me. I gave up, I moved on, and the moment I decided I wanted somebody else to connect with, that's when you decided that it was better for you to pursue me once I was unavailable instead of connecting with me when I was still young enough to appreciate it." "I'm here now," Joey said quietly. "I wanted to make it up to you. This might be the last time I—" Tate didn't understand what Joey had just said. The words seemed to reach him, but the meaning didn't. Why wouldn't Joey be here for his 26th birthday? That was the thought running through his mind. Because to Tate, it didn't make sense. Joey had always been there. He had been the person who showed up, the person who remembered, the person who made ordinary moments feel important. No matter how complicated things became between them, some part of Tate had always assumed Joey would still be there. That was the contradiction of Tate. He could push people away with one hand while desperately expecting them to stay with the other. He could convince himself he didn't need someone, yet the moment they stepped back, it felt like abandonment. His face shifted as confusion began to mix with hurt. He wasn't hearing Joey's words as a boundary or a consequence. He was hearing them as rejection. And somewhere deep inside, the same fear that had driven so many of his reactions began to surface. The fear that someone he loved had finally decided he wasn't worth choosing anymore. Tate cut him off, eyes sharp. The last time, what are you moving to Pluto or Fantasy Island? Joey swallowed, I might not be alive by your next birthday. The room went dead still. What the fuck, Tate said. I have testicular cancer, Uncle Joey said quietly. I was devastated when I learned that my favorite uncle had cancer. If I had to choose the person in Tate's family I loved most, the person I was closest to, the one who meant the most to me, it would have been Uncle Joey. He wasn't just Tate's uncle. He was my confidant. My mentor. The person who somehow understood me, even when I never had the courage to say everything out loud. I had never told Joey that I was gay. I had never confessed the full depth of my feelings for his nephew or explained every complicated emotion I carried. But somehow, he always seemed to sense what I couldn't bring myself to say. Where other people saw silence, Joey saw what was underneath it. For years I wrote to him. I poured out my heart in letters and messages, sharing my frustrations, my fears, my confusion, and everything I couldn't tell anyone else. And Joey never turned away. He never judged me. He never exposed my secrets. He simply listened. He gave me advice when I needed it and patience when I didn't know what to do. He helped me understand Tate in ways I never could have on my own. The truth was, without Joey, Tate and I probably wouldn't have been where we were. We might never have stayed connected. We might never have gone to the same school. I might have given up years earlier. Joey's kindness and support had been one of the reasons I kept going. He had been the person who reminded me that I mattered when I couldn't see it myself. And now, knowing he was sick, I felt something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just fear of losing someone. It was the realization that one of the people who had quietly shaped my life, the person who had carried my secrets, guided me and loved me without conditions, was facing something I couldn't fix. I gasped. No wonder Joey had talked to me about ending my relationship with Tate. Joey wouldn't be here to help or protect me from Tate's moods or violent impulses. He was trying to be a good surrogate uncle to me and warned us while he still had a chance. The words landed wrong, too clinical, too careful. I found out 3 weeks ago, he continued. An irregularity showed up during a routine medical checkup. Stage 4 testicular cancer, Joey sighed. Tate said, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I wish I were, Joey replied. But they caught it too late, it's already spread to my pancreas and my colon. Ironically, Tate's voice was bitter. It's not a heart condition, he said. The words came out colder than he probably intended. Not that you have one, Joey. The room went quiet. Tate looked away, his expression twisted somewhere between anger and pain. Your cancer is affecting the one thing you ever cared about. A cruel laugh escaped him, but there was no humor in it. Your balls, your pleasure, the thing you spent so much of your life chasing. His eyes hardened. And now that's the thing that's killing you. The words were harsh. Almost deliberately harsh. But underneath them was something else, hurt. Fear. The kind of fear that comes out as anger when someone doesn't know how to admit they are terrified of losing someone. Because for all of Tate's resentment, Joey had been one of the most important people in his life. And maybe that was what made it hurt so much. The person Tate was trying to punish with his words was also the person he couldn't imagine losing. For a moment Tate just stared at him, then he laughed. It wasn't laughter born from humor. It was brittle, sharp, and misplaced, the kind that slips out when something is so wildly unbelievable that the mind short-circuits. The kind of laugh that sounds wrong even to the person making it. He kept laughing, hand dragging down his face, shaking his head like this was all some elaborate, tasteless joke. The sound made my stomach knot. It wasn't relief, it wasn't cruelty, it was panic thinly disguised as laughter, and it made me deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. It's fairly ironic, don't you think? Tate said once the laughter finally stopped. His voice had gone flat, sharp around the edges. You acted like you had no balls because you didn't call and connect with me, but that's the part of your body that's ultimately going to kill you. If that's not irony, I don't know what is. You spent your whole life being the playboy, and you couldn't be bothered to go in every 6 to 12 months for a routine checkup. Joey didn't answer. You waited 10 years to see a doctor, Tate went on, his voice rising now, and you're surprised they found a mass growing on your balls? He all but shouted the last word. What do you want from me? Tate asked. Absolution? Joey sniffled. I'm sorry I didn't pick up the phone. Tate immediately mimicked the words Joey said in an almost cartoonish voice, exaggerated and cruel. You want me to forgive you because you have cancer. Joey swallowed. I'm asking for forgiveness. Fuck you, Tate said, rising from his chair. Excuse me, Joey snorted. I said fuck you. Tate's eyes were bright now, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. You disappeared for years, not a single call. Sure, you sent a letter now and then, but you never asked me about anything, not my life, not how I was doing. He took a step back, shaking his head. Whenever I sent you mail, it came back unopened, undeliverable. You'd already moved on again. Joey opened his mouth, but Tate cut him off. You were a shitty uncle, Tate said bluntly. You fucked up your life and now you want to be absolved because you finally realized your coffin is 30 years closer than you thought. He let out a harsh breath. Hell no. He turned away. You can take your forgiveness, your apology, your pathetic contrition and shove it up your ass. With that, Tate walked into the kitchen, leaving me standing there, frozen, staring at Uncle Joey. I could hear Tate in the kitchen rummaging for something in the kitchen drawers and cabinets. He was probably looking for one of his extremely tart beverages, so he didn't have to deal with the emotional problems that Joey was causing on his birthday. I'm sorry, I said quietly after a moment. He must be in shock. Joey didn't answer. I wasn't sure whether he was okay or going to stay. No, Joey said, calm but resigned. He means it. He's told me to fuck off at least 500 times since he turned 18. Tate, I called toward the kitchen. Come out here, please, Uncle Joey isn't finished. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of a glass being filled with water, then Tate's voice, sharp and echoing down the hall. Tell him to go fuck himself and get out. We have a guest, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence followed. 10 minutes later, Tate came out of the kitchen and dropped into a chair with rough, angry force. I thought you fucked yourself and left, he said. Joey looked very uncomfortable with the treatment he received from his nephew, but chose to go on explaining himself. There's something else I wanted to tell you about my will, Joey said carefully. Oh yeah, Tate snapped. What, are you leaving me your diseased ball or a stack of IOU sticky notes? I choked on my tea, and the liquid ran on the carpet as I coughed. I'm leaving you my house, Joey said evenly, and all my money. I want you to be my beneficiary. Tate stared at him, then let out a short, humorless laugh. Is this supposed to buy you absolution, forgiveness? He shook his head. Because it's not working. I'm not forgiving you just because you're throwing your stuff at me after you die. That's not why I... Oh good, Tate cut in, because there's no chance in hell. You don't have to be an asshole, Joey said. Funny choice of words, Tate shot back. He leaned forward, eyes blazing. I don't want your house, I don't want your money, and I don't want your ass on my porch. He stood. You're dead to me. Joey flinched. You abandoned me at every key point in my life once I turned 16, Tate went on, his voice shaking now with something deeper than anger. Don't even get me started on before that. You'd show up once or twice a year, act like we were buddies, and then disappear again. He laughed bitterly. Hell no, go fuck yourself, or better yet, find a faceless bimbo and have her sit on your lap. The room went silent again, thick, heavy, final. I was a shitty uncle, Joey said quietly. I'll admit it. My job required constant travel, and most of the time I didn't know where I was going to be next week. I couldn't give you a forwarding address. I called a few times, but you were either at school or had Noah over, and your mother would tell me to call back later. He swallowed. I'm sorry. It sounded like he meant it. Tate didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the wall, anywhere Joey wasn't. Aunt Julia didn't abandon me, Tate said flatly. Neither did my Uncle Tim nor Linus, and even if you hadn't had that job, if you weren't traveling, you still wouldn't have reached out, we both know that. Joey nodded once like he'd been expecting that. Do you want to know why? Tate said. His voice was sharp. Do you want to know why I'm never forgiving you? Joey slowly looked up. For a moment neither of them spoke. Tate stepped forward, his anger barely contained. He stood directly in Joey's line of vision, pointing at him, not like a child confronting an uncle but like someone who had carried years of resentment and finally decided to let it out. "Every birthday since I was 14, Tate said, you've done something." Joey's expression shifted. "Every single year." Tate's finger remained pointed. "You've made some inappropriate announcement, some big personal revelation, something that was supposed to be about you, on a day that was supposed to mean something to me." His voice trembled. "And then you acted like I was the problem if I was hurt, like I was selfish for wanting my own birthday to be about me." Silence filled the room. "Do you know how many birthdays I barely remember?" Tate laughed bitterly. "Not because they were bad, because you were always the thing that overshadowed them." Joey looked down. "Some years you showed up late, some years you forgot things that mattered, some years you gave me the same gift 2 years in a row because you didn't even remember what you bought me the first time." Tate's expression hardened. "And honestly, I don't even think you bought half of them." Joey looked back at him. "I figured it out before I was 12. The accusation landed heavily. "All those gifts, all those postcards." Tate shook his head. "I realized someone else was reminding you, your assistant, someone around you who actually remembered, someone who bought it, wrapped it, and made sure you didn't forget." His voice lowered. "The postcard was the only thing you ever did yourself." A pause. And even that was 2 sentences. Joey's face fell. "So no, I'm not forgiving you." Tate's words were firm. "Because forgiving you right now would just enable you. It would tell everyone else that you can hurt me for years, ignore how I feel, and then show up with an apology at the last possible moment because you're afraid of consequences." He swallowed. "It would tell everyone that it's okay to treat Tate like he doesn't matter as long as you say sorry before it's too late." The room went silent. For the first time, Joey wasn't looking at Tate as an angry child or a difficult nephew. He was looking at someone who had been keeping score for years. Joey nodded slowly. The anger in Tate's voice didn't make him defensive. It made him realize something far worse. He had failed. Not because he hadn't loved Tate. He had. But love, Joey realized, had never been the only thing that mattered. Sometimes love without effort still leaves wounds behind. Tate stared at him, his expression still hard. "Do you know what the one thing you did, or didn't do, that hurt me the most was?" Joey opened his mouth but nothing came out. He didn't know. And that hesitation seemed to answer the question for Tate. "It wasn't that you were incapable of being a good uncle." His voice lowered. "That's what made it worse." Joey looked at him. "You could have done it." The words carried more pain than anger. "You could have bought a gift and actually put thought into it. You could have written something meaningful, you could have shown up on time, you could have been a mentor, you could have been someone I trusted and depended on." Tate swallowed. "You were capable of being that person." A long silence followed. "You just didn't do it for me." Joey's expression shifted. "You did it for Noah." The accusation landed heavily. "You treated it as if I were there too. If Noah was included, then somehow that counted as doing it for me." Tate shook his head. "It didn't." His voice cracked slightly. "Because I noticed." He stepped closer. "I'm not stupid, Joey." The bitterness returned. "Noah might believe everything people tell him because he wants to see the best in people, but I don't." Tate's eyes narrowed. "I pay attention." He looked away briefly. "I saw what you were capable of, I saw how much effort you could put in when you wanted to." A painful pause. "And I saw where I ranked." Joey looked wounded. Tate's voice became quieter. "You weren't incapable. That was the part that hurt the most. You just prioritized someone else." The room became still. "You found something new and exciting, and suddenly I was supposed to accept being second." His jaw tightened. "You didn't just spend time with Noah." A bitter laugh escaped him. "You tried to take him away from me." Joey looked stunned. "Tate." "No." Tate shook his head. "I'm not talking about what you intended, I'm talking about how it felt." His voice dropped. "You found someone you thought was special, and you forgot that I was standing right there." He looked at Joey with years of hurt behind his eyes. You like shiny new things. A pause. Things that make you feel young and important. His expression hardened. And apparently, sometimes those shiny new things happen to be blonde boys who sleep next to me at night. The words were cruel. But beneath the cruelty was something much more vulnerable. A child who had wanted to feel chosen. And a man who was finally realizing that being loved and making someone feel loved were not always the same thing. I know, Joey said, and I know how much you loved me, I know how much you wanted me around, I knew it back then and I know it now and I failed you anyway. Tate's jaw tightened but he still didn't turn. Before Joey could say anything else, Tate stood. Tate gulped the rest of his lemon water from the dining glass in his right hand, then turned to Joey in an angry manner. Before you go, he said, voice controlled but cold, I want to talk to you outside. Let's go on a drive alone and eat dinner while I use swear words to describe how I feel about you. I don't want Noah to hear or be distressed. Then he turned to me. No, I'll return in a few hours. Okay, I said automatically, heart pounding, hoping whatever this was hadn't already ruined another birthday for Tate. The door closed behind them and I was left staring at the empty space they'd just occupied, thinking, what the hell is going on in Tate's mind? Joey and Tate left the house around 5 o'clock in the evening and walked outside together. I watched from the window as they crossed the yard towards Joey's truck. I couldn't understand what Tate was saying to his uncle, but his arms were up in the air and his finger was pointing in Joey's direction. I could see Joey turn to go back in the green Rambler until Tate yelled at his uncle. Joey and Tate got into the pickup, then a few moments later the engine started and they drove off, leaving me standing there uneasy, wondering where they were going and what was being said. 3 hours later, Joey's red pickup truck returned. Joey dropped Tate off without ceremony and Tate didn't look at me when he came inside. He didn't say a word, instead he walked straight past me up the stairs like I wasn't even there. A second later, I heard the bathroom door slam. The shower turned on almost immediately. My stomach sank. Tate never took showers unless he was under extreme emotional distress, which would explain why he was so angry. Who would want their favorite uncle to drop a bomb about cancer on his special day? Whatever time Tate and Joey had spent eating dinner together and talking about Joey's plans for his final days hadn't gone well. Tate was in the shower for over an hour. He always took long showers when he was overwhelmed, when he didn't want to be seen, when he needed the noise of the water to drown out his thoughts. You must be really distressed, I thought. I heard the shower turned off around 9 in the evening while I stayed downstairs, listening to the steady rush of water through the ceiling, hopping quietly, uselessly, that when he finally came out he'd be doing even a little bit better. I heard Tate exit the bathroom and walk into his own bedroom, slamming the door. He turned the stereo to the highest volume possible as the second floor started to jar and shake. At 10 in the evening, Tate left his room, went down the stairs, and drove off in his car. We didn't celebrate Tate's 25th birthday. I had made the cake before Joey arrived, and I knew after the cancer issue Tate would be in no mood to celebrate or eat cake, so I had a few slices, trying to distract myself from the meltdown Tate would probably be working through today. Tate didn't return that night, and he didn't sleep with me at all that night. That alone felt wrong. Tate never stayed in his room or avoided the house. He was always in my room, always nearby. What was worse, Tate spent the night not even on the property. I thought maybe he got a hotel room or slept in his car, somewhere safe. But he didn't return home. I didn't get much sleep that night because I was afraid Tate would have a meltdown and I wouldn't be there to help. Uncle Joey's visit had ruined his birthday. There was no other way to frame it. I felt awful for him. He deserved a good day, warm, uncomplicated, safe, not one where he had to find out his absent uncle was dying, forcing Tate to relive years of abandonment all at once. Tate came back around noon the day after his birthday, the way storms return, without announcement, without apology, and without any clear sense that anything had ever stopped moving in his absence. The house didn't hear him first, it felt him first. There was a shift in the air before the first loud shots rang out in the backyard, causing me to drop a dish I was washing in the kitchen sink. Tate didn't come inside but stood in the backyard, shooting bullets at record speed. Tate's movements were mechanical, detached, and empty, like a zombie inhabited Tate's body. I remember pausing mid-motion with a saucer in my hand, still slick with soap, watching the water run over my fingers without really feeling it anymore. I didn't go to the window right away. Something about the choice he made, the avoidance of the house itself, made me hesitate, like I was not supposed to interrupt whatever version of him had come back. And then I saw him, not clearly at first, just a shape through the open garage threshold standing in that in-between space where outside and inside stop agreeing with each other. He was still wearing the same clothes from his birthday. That detail lodged itself in my mind harder than anything else. Not because it was strange, but because it wasn't. Because it meant he hadn't transitioned, hadn't reset, hadn't allowed the day to end for him in any meaningful way. It was like time had simply failed to convince him. Tate didn't look at the house. He didn't look for me. He moved with a kind of directness that didn't invite interruption, going deeper into the garage like he already knew exactly what he was going to do there. The door didn't fully close behind him, it stayed open just enough to let light spill out in a harsh rectangle across the driveway. That's when I heard the first sound, not the full sequence yet, just the beginning of it, a sharp crack that split the quiet like something being decisively placed into the world. My hand tightened reflexively around the saucer. Then another sound followed and another after a brief, measured pause. It wasn't chaotic, that was the part my mind registered before anything else. There was spacing, rhythm, control. Each report came with an intention behind it, deliberate intervals, consistent packing like he was calibrating something invisible rather than reacting to it. The sound repeated in clusters, not in panic, but in repetition that suggested practice, familiarity, a body remembering a pattern even if the rest of him was elsewhere. But outside, everything had changed. The shots continued in sequences, brief bursts followed by silence, then another controlled burst again. Not random, not emotional in the way people assume gunfire to be when they hear it from far away. This was repetition with structure, like someone repeating a phrase until it stopped meaning anything except what it physically was. And I knew that sound, not in the technical sense, in the memory sense. It pulled something up in me. I didn't ask for the echo of a different absence, a different stretch of time when I had come back and found him already changed by being left alone with his own silence. The cruise, Mark, the space I thought would pass as normal time passes but didn't. Tate didn't respond to distance the way other people did. Distance didn't soften him, it sharpened him. The gunfire outside continued in measured waves, the garage holding it like a container meant for repetition rather than release. Each pause felt like a breath held too long. Each return felt like the breath being forced out again. I didn't move toward him yet. I just stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and running water, listening to a pattern that felt less like noise and more like a language I wasn't being invited to understand. And in that moment, what unsettled me most wasn't the sound itself. It was how much it sounded like something he had already decided was necessary. I called Susie. I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to sit alone with the gunshots and my worry anymore. "Hey Susie," I said. "Hi honey," she replied immediately. "What's going on? How was Tate's birthday?" "I wouldn't know," I said quietly. "We never celebrated it." "What did he forget, not come home?" "I wish," I said. "Uncle Joey stopped by." There was a pause. "You mean Tate's favorite uncle, his dad's brother?" "That's the one." "Oh no," Susie said, already bracing herself. "What happened?" "He dropped a bomb," I said. "He's dying testicular cancer." "Oh no it." "Tate locked himself in the bathroom for hours," I went on. "Wouldn't come out, then he left last night and slept God knows where." Silence on the other end of the line. "He only did that once before," I added. "On his 15th birthday when he had a stomach bug and spent the entire night vomiting in the toilet." Susie exhaled slowly. "That's really bad." "Yeah," I said, "that's how I know how much this wrecked him." A sharp crack split the air behind the house. I froze, then rushed to the window. In the backyard, Tate stood with a pistol, lining up glass bottles on the fence and firing. He only ever did this when he was completely overwhelmed, when the pressure had nowhere else to go. "What's that noise?" Susie asked through the phone. "Tate," I said, my throat tight. "He's in the backyard, shooting glass bottles with his gun." "A beat. Does he do that often?" "Not in years," I said, "only when he's under extreme pressure." "Do you want me to come over?" she asked gently. "I think that would be amazing," I said. "He needs a feminine presence right now, someone who can love on him a little." "Why would Uncle Joey drop something like that on his birthday?" Susie said, clearly angry. "Search me," I said. "After he told Tate, things blew up. Tate basically told him to go fuck himself more than once, then they drove off together to talk and eat dinner. Tate didn't want to upset me, so they went on a drive. And then he came back 3 hours later," I said. "Went straight upstairs, barricaded himself in the bathroom, took a long shower and left the house. No dinner, no cake, nothing." I swallowed. It was the worst birthday I've ever experienced. Susie was quiet. Second only to when my mother forgot my 9th birthday, I added bitterly, and gave me a doll as a present 4 months later. Tate went to reload his gun in the garage, so the gunshots briefly stopped. He kept the ammunition in the back garage, and within seconds he disappeared out of sight. I'm really worried about him, Susie, I said quietly. His mental health was great until his uncle showed up. There's obviously bad blood there. Joey basically abandoned him after his 16th birthday. Joey popped in and out of his life, fed him crumbs while traveling the world. Imagine growing up with an uncle like that. Well, Susie said gently, you kind of had a mother like that. I huffed. Touché. Where is he now? She asked. In the garage, reloading bullets. There was a pause. That sounds dangerous. He's not going to hurt anyone, I said quickly, trying to reassure both of us. Unless a glass bottle suddenly starts looking like Uncle Joey. I let out a weak laugh, more nerves than humor. Is he okay? She asked. Is Tate ever okay? I don't know, I admitted. I don't even think he wants the cake I made anymore. I think the day's just ruined for him. Tate already hates birthdays, so yesterday didn't help at all. Then don't push it, Susie said. I'll come over and we can eat some cake together. He doesn't need reminders right now. Okay, I said, relieved. That would help. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. And hey, keep him from shooting any people. I'll do my best, I said, watching the garage door like it might give me answers. Whenever Tate became overwhelmed, when stress and anger built beyond what he could contain, he had a habit of disappearing into the backyard. It didn't matter where we lived. His childhood home. The Green Rambler. The location changed, but the ritual stayed the same. He would go outside to his target course and start shooting. He had carefully arranged targets, objects, and photographs, using the time to focus on his stance, his breathing, and the precision of his movements. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a hobby. To me, it was something else. It was the place Tate went when his emotions became too big for him to process. I honestly thought he had moved past it. He hadn't done it once in the 2 years since we moved into this house. I assumed the interest had faded, that maybe he had outgrown it. I was wrong. Today he was completely absorbed in it. The intensity was familiar. The focus. The anger underneath the concentration. The way he disappeared into the repetition was easier than facing whatever he was feeling. And suddenly, I remembered another time. When Mark and I returned from our gay cruise. When my mother died. When Tate had struggled to accept that, for the summer, I had chosen someone else to spend my time with. He had been devastated in a way that didn't make sense to anyone else. Instead of telling me how hurt he was, he had retreated into anger. And during that time, he had gone through $25,000 worth of ammunition. Not because of the targets. Because he couldn't accept feeling replaced. Standing there watching him now, I realized this wasn't really about shooting. It had never been. It was about control. It was about a person who felt powerless over his emotions, finding something he could control when everything inside him felt like it was falling apart. I remembered every time Tate had lost someone. Those were the worst times of his life.